mixed inside of there. So with that said, and I hope Miss Holder gets to log back in pretty soon. Let me start with Timothy Hamel-Smith and ask him to introduce himself, and he's representing HOPE. Gary Griffith is representing the National Transformation Alliance. David Abdulah is representing the Movement for Social Justice, and Felicia Holder is representing the People's Empowerment Party, PP. So let me start with Timothy Hamel-Smith and ask you to introduce your party and yourself. You have 2 minutes starting now.
Good morning, Senator Richards, and good morning to all your viewers on Power 102. I am Timothy Hamel-Smith. I represent as political leader of HOPE, the party HOPE. And one of the things that people tend to ask is, what does HOPE stand for? And we stand on 4 pillars that we feel are the foundation of what Trinidad and Tobago requires in order to transform the nation. And because we see that the nation, one of the problems with it is that we are riddled with corruption, and it is what has not permitted Trinidad and Tobago to achieve the kind of potential that it has is due to this corruption. We start with honest government. We believe that honest government is pivotal to any change, to any transformation of Trinidad and Tobago. And within that, we also seek opportunity for all, as opposed to, you don't have to have a party card, you don't have to be, favored, you don't have to be a financier. But we believe that all people of Trinidad and Tobago should have that opportunity to attain their goals and to achieve their aspirations. We believe that the kind of leadership that we need to bring to Trinidad and Tobago is people-centered leadership. And in people-centered leadership, we look for the common good of all people so that we can sustain not just and remove inequality, which tends to drag down the country, so that everybody will be able to participate in the building up of Trinidad and Tobago from the ground up, and leaders may emerge at all levels of Trinidad and Tobago. And finally, we believe we need to have economic transformation. Trinidad has relied on simply having oil and gas for too long, and now we find ourselves in a quagmire. And it will take, and you will hear later on today, Professor Patrick Watson telling us what we need to do to achieve economic transformation.
Thank you. 2 minutes up.
Those are the 4 foundational pillars which we think distinguishes HOPE, and we think that brings to Trinidad and Tobago, to the governance of Trinidad and Tobago, what we believe it needs at this point.
Thank you. 2 minutes up, Mr. Hamel-Smith. Let me go to Felicia Holder and welcome her. Thank you, Mr. Hamel-Smith. Felicia, welcome. Could you unmute, please? I think you're still muted. And you have 2 minutes starting now to introduce yourself and your party's policies, etc. Go ahead, please. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Paul, and good morning to the other panelists. My name is Felicia Holder. I'm the chairman of the Progressive Empowerment Party. And in introducing the Progressive Empowerment Party, I have to say that we were founded 6.5 years ago in 2017 as a direct result of the failure of the two-party system that presently exists in Trinidad and Tobago, that has seen a revolving door of red and yellow, where the people have been left behind, they have been neglected. Trinidad and Tobago has been left behind and neglected, whereas the world is moving forward while we continue to play party politics and get nothing as a result out of it. Our policies, we have 21 policies that are focused on the redevelopment of Trinidad and Tobago, that focus on home ownership, that focus on uplifting communities, that focus on bringing people together, because one of the reasons we have this race voting in Trinidad is because these two parties have used that to divide us along racial lines. And we say one people under one flag. We encourage everybody to join us under the umbrella. We say a rising tide lifts all boats. We look at the most underprivileged societies and seek to raise their circumstances to bring hope and opportunity for all. The Progressive Empowerment Party is focused on taking Trinidad and Tobago forward. We're focused on ending corruption, bringing about real change through meaningful programs like national development to ensure that we have a safer and happier Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you so much, Felicia. Let's go to David Abdulah of the Movement for Social Justice. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Paul. Good morning to all of your listeners and viewers, and good morning to colleagues who are on the panel this morning in this debate. I'm David Abdulah, political leader of the Movement for Social Justice. As our name states very clearly, we are and stand for social justice. And this is consistent with the preamble to the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago, which states, and I'm paraphrasing, that we, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, affirm our belief in the principles of social justice, that the material resources should serve the common good, not the good of the few, I've added that piece, but the common good, and that labor should not be forced to work, be exploited or forced to work in inhumane conditions, and that advancement should be on the basis of merit and integrity. So that is what the preamble, one of the clauses of the preamble to the Constitution, which speaks to social justice. But our society is not one where social justice prevails. We have a system, an economic system, which benefits the few, benefits the wealthy few, while the majority of the people in this country, workers, the unemployed, small business people, fisher folk, farmers, and so on, are struggling to survive day to day. Many of them can't last from payday to payday, can't put food on the table. And that is absolutely wrong in a country that still has huge natural and human resources and other assets. So we are about the fundamental transformation, not just diversification, but the fundamental transformation of the relations of economic power, so that we advocate the social solidarity economy where wealth and income can be in the hands of everyone and not just in the hands of a few. Secondly, we have offered a vision for changing Trinidad and Tobago. We say that we have to evolve. We were an independent country in August of 1962. We became a Republican state in August, September of 1976. And that is the first republic of 1976, the first Republican Constitution. But the institutions of state, the parliament, the cabinet, judiciary, all of these institutions really were the old colonial institutions. And so we are saying that we need to evolve to the second republic, where power can be placed in people's hands, where people can be empowered in their communities and in their workplaces. And those are just some of the things that we say need to be done.
Gary Griffith, good morning. Go ahead, please. 2 minutes starting now.
Good morning, Gary Griffith, political leader of the National Transformation Alliance. Good morning to your many listeners, viewers, and also to my colleagues. And the reason I say colleagues is because we do not see persons who have different political views as the enemy. And that has been the problem in this country. Whether it is your PNM or UNC, that is your right. And these parties have done a lot towards the development of Trinidad and Tobago. The National Transformation Alliance, we may be perceived as the new kids on the block, but the fact of the matter is that we have now become the catalyst and the eye-opener that everyone is watching to see what it is we are doing, what it is we are saying. That is the word. When we have that word in the NTA, transformation, this is to transform the country, to turn around the situation of the politics of old, where most political parties and even leaders will spend most of their time attacking, destroying, ridiculing, undermining. We've seen certain political leaders do that even in this campaign. We intend to do different. We intend to unite, to build, to be productive. And that is where the word alliance comes in, where we are bringing an alliance of minds. It doesn't mean that you have to be an NTA till you die. And you would have seen it that the batting lineup we have in our slate of candidates and aldermen and possible mayors is second to none, because we just want the best persons available. And you will hear it later on, Paul, and to the rest of my colleagues. We are not here to try to discredit anyone or to try to come up with empty promises, which is known in politics as a manifesto. What we have is something called a roadmap, where it is we will be getting the best minds available to come up with something and not just give you though we have 20 policies, 30 policies, anyone can do that until you are there and you can actually ascertain what is the problem. Only then can you come up with the proper solutions. So the NTA, again, it is based on transformation, and it is based on forming a proper alliance of getting the best persons available to unite and develop Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you, Gary. And thank everyone for being here. Just so you know, the general format we'll be taking is that I will be posing the initial questions to you and rotating you in terms of starting your access to the questions to try and have some kind of fairness, so that with different questions, I'll start with different persons in terms of posing the questions. So let me pose the first question, starting with Felicia holding this round. This is a local government election, but it has national implications for many different reasons. How important, because this first segment is crime and security, how important are crime and citizen security as a local government issue? Felicia.
Well, I'm happy you asked that question, Paul, because this actually sparked a debate before the debate, and I was wondering why was national security being included in a local election debate. I understand that it's important to the national issues, but if we had to focus on local government, it's not really part of that discussion. However, I understand that around an election time, people are focused on listening to the policies of different parties. This local election, we consider it a referendum for the Progressive Empowerment Party, for the nation on a whole, where people are looking to see real alternatives to what we have experienced in the past. One of my colleagues said earlier that he's not going to diss any of the other political parties. I'm not here to do that either. But I have to point out that those two political parties have taken advantage of the citizens by using race to divide us. And now in this election that's coming up, we're looking for alternatives that can give ideas and solutions of how we take Trinidad and Tobago forward. Yes, national security is important, but also so is social development, also so is national development. All of those things go hand in hand. And if that's the discussion that we're going to go down, I think that is the road I would want to take, versus discussing what should be a national topic on a local government platform.
Thank you. Let's go with David Abdulah next. How important is crime and security as a local government election issue, if at all?
Well, yeah, one would expect that a local government election is focused on local issues and who is going to best represent the interests of the burgesses in their respective municipal corporations. But given where the country is at, where the society is at, quite obviously, national issues are going to impact, because when we open the newspapers, when we listen to the news, crime and violence is center stage. And therefore, you know, it begins with the safety and security of every citizen. And in that regard, of course, municipal corporations increasingly are going to have some responsibility for safety and security of citizens. And therefore, one can't separate, if you wish, one issue from another, because the policies that are implemented at central government level or that are not implemented at central government level will impact on what happens in the communities, which then impact on municipal corporations. So you can't separate them fundamentally, and therefore it is an important issue. And we have to address crime and violence, so perhaps I'll get a chance to come back to that later on. We have to address crime and violence at the root cause of what is taking place. Why does this happen? Why do we have a violent society? Because we have always had a violent society. We came out of violence. Slavery and indenture were violent systems, and we have not been able to escape a culture of violence. And until we address the issue of a culture of violence and work towards a culture of peace, we are really going to continue to have the problems of crime. And that has to deal with our education system, our economic system to provide opportunities and decent jobs and incomes for everybody, and the possibility of everybody developing to their full human potential. But we'll come back to that, I hope. Yeah.
All right. Gary Griffith, how important are crime and security as local government issues, if at all?
Yeah, sure. I think it's very unfortunate that some will think that it is not important. In fact, it is the most important, even in local government. The most fundamental rights of any citizen in any country is that of your right to be safe, your right to live. And even in local government, let us not believe that local government is just about box drains and roads and drainage. It has to do with making sure that you are secure. Without safety and security, prosperity can come in. Without safety and security, people will be caged. Without safety and security, you're going to be concerned about investment and about doing anything that can be productive because you're concerned. It will affect foreign investment. So even when it comes to local government, when persons decide to vote, they're not going to vote to see which political party is going to just fix my box drains and build roads. It has to do with the whole concept of providing me with my basic needs. The most basic need is that of safety and security, because if that is the case, and national security was not a fundamental part of local government, the municipal police will not be part of the whole debate. And that is where municipal policing comes in. The same way I was able to transform the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, we intend to do the same by getting the best team available to ensure that even with municipal police officers, whether it is in your boroughs or your corporations, we can have them perform at optimum level to get the country to feel safe, to feel secure, to feel comfortable, to invest, to be able to come out onto the streets, to be able to go to restaurants. And with that, it helps develop the country, develops your community, it develops your corporation, it develops your borough. So we are going to provide that same template that transformed the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service to provide the period where the country felt safer more than any time before, where crime went down to number 4 behind health, safety, and the economy, to do the same in your local communities through local government transformation as it pertains to national security.
Thank you. Timothy Hamel-Smith.
We would say that crime and corruption is the fundamental underlying cause why Trinidad and Tobago cannot develop. And therefore, nothing can happen unless we attack crime and corruption and eliminate it from Trinidad and Tobago. And that, if therefore that is correct, then it must be, it takes precedence, if you like, in all matters relating to local government, because local government will never perform as it ought to if crime and corruption continue to pervade Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore it is a root cause why Trinidad and Tobago has failed to develop, achieve its potential. And therefore it is vital that we have on the agenda, even in local government, even as we approach local government, that we have on the agenda, how shall we attack crime and corruption so that in fact we could best achieve all that is possible within the local government, where leaders can grow up from the ground up and take their place in making Trinidad and Tobago a better nation. But primarily, we must end crime and corruption and attack it so that the roots of it cannot continue to create negative vibes throughout Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you. Rebuttal round. Felicia Holder, you said you didn't, but correct me if I'm wrong, you said you didn't think crime and that's what I got. Crime and security, citizen security should have been one of the forefront topics in this discussion. Am I incorrect?
I'm saying that crime and national security is not focused on local government. But if we want to talk about national security, I don't mind diving deep into that. Further than the plans to reduce crime, let's talk about national development, which Timothy Hamel-Smith, he said it. He said that we as a country, crime and corruption are the main issues plaguing us. I want to disagree. I believe that poverty is the reason that crime and corruption exist. And if we want to talk and discuss that issue, I can speak at length about it, because nobody goes and robs and kills somebody because they're bored or they have nothing to do. The underpinning of crime in this country is because people are simply poor. I'm living in a Black community. I'm living in a community where people are conversations I'm hearing as I'm getting ready in the morning. You're hearing children crying because they're hungry. And that's the reality of Trinidad and Tobago. It's not enough to say that we're going to police them. It's not enough to say that we're going to lock them up and throw them in these cells. Where is the hope and opportunity for these neglected communities? If we want to talk local government election, let's talk about these communities that have been left behind year after year, decade after decade, political party, government after government. And what do we have to show for it? Crime it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists because of need. And if we're going to have that discussion on the needs of these communities, let's take it there.
David?
Yeah, well, let me put a slightly different shade on it. I don't necessarily disagree with what Felicia said, but let me put a different shade on it. I think the problem is that we have an economic system and a social structure that have not changed from colonial plantation days, in essence. So our education system is essentially an elitist education system. We just had SEA results coming out yesterday, or day before yesterday. And the ministry said 58, I think, % of the students got more than 50% in the exam. That means that 42% got less than 50%. I think some 13% or 14% got less than 30% in that exam. Now, this is not a new development. This has been going on for years. If you go back to the issue of CSEC, what we used to call O-levels long time, you get a very high percentage, more than 50% of the students who should be passing our CSEC exams don't get 5 subjects or more. We have failed systems, or rather we have systems that fail the majority of the people, and those systems benefit the few. And it is those structural problems in our society that causes a problem. So that years ago, there were poor people, but there was a sense of social mobility. One generation worked hard and their children went to secondary school. The first generation didn't. The third generation went to university. So there was a sense of social mobility. Now that has been broken. And so young people don't have that hope in many of our communities to progress. And the only jobs that are available for them are security officers or workers in fast food and so on. And they don't see that as being able to give themselves a secure future, to buy a home and so on. And the labor market, which I come back to. Yeah, okay, I'll come back to the issue of the labor market and why that frustrates
Gary Griffith
young
and
people.
Hamel-Smith, Felicia Holder, and both David spoke and in the context of crime and citizen security. There are 2 ways to tackle crime that can work side by side. As Felicia raised it, the highest correlated, most studies, 90% of studies, in terms of high correlation with crime in a particular jurisdiction is social inequity, which Felicia spoke to and David spoke to. This is an incontrovertible fact. There's the other side of it where you can police a state and pass laws and put people in jail, but that's not sustainable in many people's estimation. Gary, what's your party's perspective on those 2 issues sometimes clashing in our jurisdiction, where we don't seem to be dealing with the inequity issues as fervently as we pour money into national security, and that in many people's estimations is unsustainable?
No, they're both correct. It goes hand in hand. So let me clarify. On most occasions, politicians, when they do not have any knowledge as it pertains to criminology or national security or law enforcement, they turn to the social concerns, which is the basic thing, because that's they go in their comfort zone. It's not to take away the importance of it. When you deal with law enforcement, national security, there are 3 aspects: primary, secondary, and tertiary. Primary is the main aspect that will reduce crime anywhere in the world. Policing, hard targeting, law enforcement, high visibility, deterrence, investigations. That is primary. You do that, you will reduce crime. You would have seen it with me as Commissioner of Police. It was the highest reduction in crime, in violent crime in 17 years. As the Minister of National Security, it was the highest reduction in serious crime. However, I agree with David and Felicia. There's also something known as secondary crime prevention, finding avenues to take persons away from a life of crime, the development of the economy, education, health, social services, even sport. If these things are not provided, it may cause persons to go in the wrong direction. But again, going hand in hand, that aspect of primary crime prevention, it is the fundamental part that will reduce crime. There's also something called tertiary, which is the justice system. If the justice system is flawed, you will get that revolving door in crime, such as a high recidivism because of poor rehabilitation.
And Timothy Hamel-Smith.
Yeah, so I think Felicia makes the point that it is poverty which brings about crime. And one of the things that Hope says is that corruption prevents us from getting all peoples to benefit and become achievers, promote their own well-being in order to get better jobs. So in fact, corruption, therefore, is a segment of crime that we have to get under control. Unless we do that, we will never prosper. And therefore, you will get inequality between the rich and the poor. And corruption, we believe, is at the very heart, the essence of what prevents our government from being able to grow the country in a way that all people can have a good, prosperous life and succeed. And I think David makes a point that the education system is not supportive of that. But it is corruption that overwhelms the country and prevents us from tackling the problems that we have in order to achieve a better country, sustainability, and transformation, so that those from the bottom can go up. Trinidad we always had poverty, where we didn't always have this level of crime and corruption. And I don't think, to say poverty comes first and then crime after, I think negates the fact that it is a corrupt society engendered by corrupt politics that has not allowed Trinidad, the wealth of Trinidad, to flow right through from top to bottom and allow people to grow and get opportunities to achieve their objectives, their aspirations, and their goals.
Thank you. I'm going to ask David and Gary, can you leave your cameras on, please? Because let's presume that we're on CNN and we need the cameras on all the time, right?
Yeah, sure.
So this is the interaction round now, and there are two schools of thought that we
I was just trying to save some bandwidth there. Yeah, but
talking about here, and this is a round where you can interact freely, given what you've stated before. What do you think in terms of your parties and those you represent, and you're aspiring to win districts in this local government election? How can local government bodies be a better tool to achieve both ideas you're talking about, whether it be the social inequity intervention and closing the economic gap in the country, or municipal police aiding in law enforcement? Let's start with Felicia. You can interact freely.
Well, as it pertains to local government, as it is right now in its present form, I do not believe that it's set up to do any of what you just outlined. And this is where I would have to introduce the Progressive Empowerment Party's proposal on local government. And I want to say that this is not us saying that local government is an absolute failure. It isn't. But the way it's set up right now, it obviously does not work.
What has to change?
Pardon?
What has to change?
Well, what we propose is having seamless communication overlap. The way we're set up right now, we have 41 constituencies, 14 regional corporations, 9 police divisions, 5 RHAs, 1 Tobago House of Assembly, and nothing overlaps. You have an issue right now. Me as a citizen, I have an issue in my community with mosquitoes. I have no idea who I have to go to. I have a big pothole in the middle of my road on Car Street. I have no idea who to turn to. You go to a counselor, they say, go to that person there. There's no proper channels. There's nothing set up to actually function and work within the community. So what we propose is to make all of the constituencies autonomous, merge a little of what local government does with central government in terms of giving each of the constituencies the autonomy to manage public works, public utilities, education, security, and health within their constituencies. This idea, this plan, this master plan that we have is supposed to make accessing these services easier. You in Port of Spain should not be waiting for a valve to turn on in a reamer for you to get water. You shouldn't have to wait.
Do you agree with that approach? Do you think that can work?
Sorry, Paul. Did you ask
do you think Felicia's party's proposition can work? Blurring the lines between central government responsibilities and local government bodies. Is that what you think, Felicia?
I'm not saying blur the lines. I'm saying remove the red tape and the bureaucracy that inhibits the constituencies, inhibits the corporations from actually doing their job. One of the main issues that councillors have is they say we don't have access to resources. Central government is stifling those resources. So why not make it easy accessible? Why not give them the autonomy to manage supervisors of public works, public utilities within the constituencies? Why not make it easier so that when residents have a complaint, they know exactly who to go to? Why not make it easier for education and us to monitor education within the constituencies?
David,
You
your
just
thoughts?
mentioned.
Tim, your thoughts?
Oh, yes. But
Okay,
certainly, local government needs to be able to have influence on what transpires within their local area. And therefore, we do need to grow up leaders who are capable of looking after the needs and interests of the people within their community. It does mean that in order to have the kind of influence you want, money, it becomes important. And therefore, having local government have their own and sufficient resources in order to carry out what is needed for their community, it becomes vital.
But is that going to empower people in the burgesses in the 14 corporations in a way that reduces the economic gap? Because that's Felicia's initial proposition and David's initial proposition. The inequity in it's just showed up in many studies. The inequity is driving crime, is the theory here. Is that going to close the economic gap, David and Gary?
Okay, so let me say that in terms of local government, we are very strong for local government in terms of empowering people where they live. And so, but we want to also see that in the context of constitutional reform. Local government should be embedded in the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago. That's the first point I want to make. And therefore, you wouldn't have had a situation of whether the postponement of an election violates somebody's constitutional rights. If it's embedded in Constitution, it would have violated someone's constitutional rights. Secondly, we want to see the village and community councils being far more involved in the process of delivery of resources in terms of what communities need. Decisions about what is required in a corporation or in a community should not be made centrally by any ministry. That should be made by the communities themselves. And our proposal is that resources get allocated according to needs. So if, for example, every 20,000 community of 20,000 people requires 1 secondary school, 3 ECE schools, health centers, and so on, certain number of recreation grounds, those things are a must and must be delivered, and resources must be allocated to them for that. So you get away from partisan budgeting, and you therefore get budgeting according to needs, and those needs determined by the communities themselves. We actually would like to move to a situation where local government elections are not contested by political parties at all, but by people from the communities in the electoral districts who people know would represent them, because local government is supposed to be about representation, not supposed to be about the party and using it to leverage the party to get into government. It's supposed to be about representation of the needs of the people. And that is what we are.
Okay, I just want to go quickly to what Felicia spoke about is something that the Congress of the People had since 2007 or 2008. That was decentralization of government, the devolution of power. But let me clarify again. By us speaking about what should be done and what can be done, it is not going to happen. We have to accept the facts. We have to accept what is now. The things that they spoke about make sense, but it cannot happen unless you have some constitutional majority. What we need now is to know how can we find solutions and not to find excuses for the present problem. For example, I heard something that I would like to get back to, because I think it is rather dangerous to try to link poverty to say that poverty can be the catalyst to crime. And that is a very dangerous statement, because a lot of persons are poor and they do not turn to crime, the vast majority. So let us not get this perception that because poverty
isn't that you're making a false equivalency. People are not saying that every poor person engages in crime. The theory or the proposition is that crime and social inequity is a driver of criminal activity. They're two different things.
Okay, so let me give you the criminological theory. crime is a product of opportunity. The greater the deterrent, the less likelihood persons would commit crime because of the greater possibility of them being apprehended. So, for example, criminologists did interviews with persons who committed crime in the United Kingdom. 95% of them who committed robbery says because of the need for money. So you understand there is that degree of imbalance that requires persons to have opportunities. It is not an excuse. But then there's the white-collar crime, the rich gangs, the persons who have, and that has played the biggest part towards the destruction of Trinidad and Tobago because of the cartels, because of governments giving state contracts to gangs. We're giving them $50,000 box train and they bill them $5 billion for it. That becomes the problem, and it filters down to affect the small man. So let us be very careful about trying to automatically link poverty to being the catalyst to crime. And that's what I want to clarify. And again, going back to the point of local government, with national security, which is what this topic is about, national security plays a part by looking at the same things that David and Felicia spoke about, where it is you have all of the different needs that the community requires. This can go hand in hand with national security. For example, when we build the AstroTurf in St. James Barracks, that's to ensure young persons could play sport, the Commissioner's Cup. So you can interlock policing with the development of a community. When we had Street Road, crosstalk, certain things to get policing to be able to help in developing the community and to assist in the development of young persons to turn away from a life of crime.
Thank you. Final question in this national security round, and I will start with David Abdulah on this. The issue of law enforcement and the support of municipal police. How do you see that? How does your party see that working moving forward with this new proposed incarnation of local government with the Local Government Reform Act? Do you think it can work? What is your party's perspective on that, given the fact that so many of these 14 municipalities have coastline areas? We have a porous border issue in Trinidad and Tobago, which leads to the illegal gun issue, the migrant issue, all making the crime situation more complicated. What is your party's perspective on municipal police working with, if at all, law enforcement, TTPS, TT Defense Force, etc., in alleviating crime through local government collaboration?
Well, obviously, the municipal police have to work hand in hand with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. That goes without saying. You can't have silos, and one of the problems that we have in this country is silo governance, and where the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. So quite clear, and that goes within law enforcement, customs, or the police, or the defense force, and so on. So yes, the municipal police need to be better resourced and would support the work of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service in terms of the policing in the municipalities for which they have responsibility. But you cannot get away from addressing crime and corruption from a national level. And the MSJ, contrary to what Gary may think, we have, from many, many years now, we have very many detailed policies to deal with that, including things like lie detector tests for everyone in customs, BIR, licensing, police, defense force, and so on. All those areas where there's corruption. Strengthening, removing the financial intelligence unit from being a department of the Ministry of Finance to a standalone unit with investigative powers, so they don't just get reports, but they investigate and move the thing towards prosecution. Strengthening the police complaints authority, a whole range of things that we have proposed to deal with. We need to deal with campaign finance reform. Unless political parties are regulated with respect to where they get money from, corruption is not going to be dealt with, because corruption starts at the head. The fish rots from the head. And so we need to deal with party finance legislation. We have put in very detailed memoranda to the Joint Select Committee of Parliament that is examining a piece of legislation to introduce party finance regulations. So there are many positions that the MSJ has adopted with respect to dealing with crime and violence, quite apart from the social aspect, which Gary calls Tier 2. We also have addressed Tier 1 issues as well. The issue of guns coming into the country, the gangs and why tying that back to those who have money that are engaged in the trade of drugs and guns. All of that we have dealt with.
Felicia.
I want to start by saying a police state is not the answer. That is not the answer to crime. Yes, on a local government level, municipal police has to work with national police. And Gary would have pointed out the primary, secondary, and tertiary reasons behind crime. But I have to ask, right now we're focused on the primary, where the secondary and the tertiary, where are those working in tandem with ensuring that crime is eradicated in Trinidad and Tobago? No, you can't say that every poor person commits crime, but you can't deny that it's a driving factor behind why many crimes are committed. You can't deny that you throw somebody in a prison cell, you lock them up for 10 years and they come out, they haven't been rehabilitated. What are they going to do? Not go back on the streets and do the same thing? We have always been focused on the heavy-handed approach. Operation, in my early years, I remember Operation Anaconda, one shot, one kill, all of these very heavy-handed approaches, yet crime, the only time we have really seen a dip in crime was during the lockdown in COVID. And why? Because people were literally locked up in their homes. They couldn't commit crime. I can tell you in the ghetto, people are not afraid of the police. They're not afraid of the police when food and feeding your children becomes a necessity. And if we're not addressing those things holistically, then we are literally just militarizing the country and making us into a police state. And as it pertains to working in the communities, municipal police, the porous borders, like you mentioned, of course, securing the borders, that is part of national security. But I have to underscore and insist that the plans for the country as it pertains to national security, even on a local level, have to be focused on looking at all the reasons why Trinidad and Tobago has such a high crime problem. It has to be focused on addressing the issue. No, I do not think that it's a basic approach by pointing out the social issues and the concerns that drive crime, because in countries where the crime is lowest, prisons are literally closing down. That is not the reality of Trinidad and Tobago.
Black Timothy Hamel-Smith.
So you have two levels of crime. Certainly there are national issues that cannot be dealt with at the local government level. You pointed to guns coming into the country, and that can only, and porous borders, that can only be handled at a national level. But there is real room for municipal police having a role within their communities. The truth is that one of the things that the police need to do is establish relationships with their community. Trust has to develop, because where we've fallen short very often is in the detection rate. And the reason why the detection rate is so low, or partly why, is because people are not willing to come forward because they don't trust the police. And it is through the municipal police that you can establish bonds, because policing should not only be a matter relating to crime, but serving the people. And hence, a good reason why police now have police clubs, in order to develop a certain type of culture within communities. And there needs to be that interaction between police and the community, which reinforces trust and therefore develops a new type of equity within those local governments. So both are important. We cannot tackle the national problems at a local level. We have to have, whether it is, we have scanning, there's scanning nowadays, you can carry through 150 containers in 1 hour. And yet we cannot. Why can we not bring it into the system? I think that corruption is at the heart of why we cannot introduce those elements that are required in order to get security and crime and corruption under control. But local government is certainly very important in the police sector.
Go ahead.
Yep, please.
Yeah. Okay, so let me just clarify quickly some very inaccurate comments. Okay, so the first thing is, as we pertain to the porous borders, it's very difficult for the municipal police to be involved in that. Their role and function, it is very difficult, if not impossible, because 95% of the illegal drugs and weapons that enter our country come through the legitimate ports of entry. So that will be based on the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, secondary, but more so the customs and other elements. So that's not, as it pertains to local government, the porous borders will have very little impact in dealing with reducing that. As it pertains to the comment of the police state, where did that come in? How could putting good policing be conceived as a police state? I mean, it's very unfortunate to use those words. A police state is when it is, it seems that the individual shouldn't know. A police state is when it is you have one leader making full direction and virtual dictatorship to run law enforcement and even the judiciary. That is a police state. It has nothing to do with good policing. The other comment about crime being reduced because the borders were locked down because of COVID, totally inaccurate, because if that was the case, how come in October, November, after I left, and there was still a state of emergency, COVID and the pandemic and the public health regulations, we had the highest number of murders in the history of Trinidad and Tobago, sorry, the second and third. That was October, November. Also in Jamaica, Guyana, and almost every state in the United States, crime actually went down drastically after COVID. So I guess the criminals in those countries missed Felicia's memo. Having said that, again, we go back to the local government. I can give the assurance that local government, if you have the right persons in place, similar to what we did when I was Minister of National Security and we formed the Rapid Response Unit, the Community Comfort Patrol, the National Security Special Operation Group, the National Operations Center, and then as the Commissioner of Police, when I introduced the Rapid Response Unit, the Gender-Based Violence Unit, the Social Media Monitoring Unit, the Operational Command Center, SORT, pepper spray, tasers, dashboard cameras, making sure you have a 5-minute response. We can do the same thing for municipal police. So the same template I use, using the principles of leadership, accountability, management, and measurement of performance, we can transform the municipal police to make the place just as safe as the citizens felt under my watch as Commissioner of Police. We'll also involve the business sector through the I Support Our Services. We'll incorporate the private security industry. We'll also incorporate the business sector to have their cameras fed into an operational command center, similar to what we did. We can implement drones through the private sector. So there's a lot you can do in local government to transform the whole security apparatus in the corporations or the boroughs, and that is what we intend to do. And again, finally, what Timothy spoke about, we saw the transformation in the police service. The public trust and confidence in the police service was 14% when I arrived. When I left, was 55%. We can transform every arm of the public service in the same manner and get the public to believe and be confident if you have that type of proper leadership.
Thank you very much. That's the end of our first segment on crime and national security. We're going to take a short break. This is the Power 102 digital debate series focusing on local government election 2023. When we come back, we will focus on more specifically on finance and investment in the local government bodies. We'll be joined by Mr. Dindial and also representing the NTA, also Patrick Watson, Professor Patrick Watson, representing Hope. All that and more coming up right here on Power 102 Digital.